welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park, elongating the shapes of playing children and lounging couples into distorted caricatures on the green canvas below. It was one of those unusually warm autumn days, and I was grateful for a chance to leave the confines of our apartment and enjoy the outdoors with my son, Charlie. "Daddy, look at that dog!" Charlie exclaimed, pointing excitedly towards a frisky spaniel chasing its tail near the fountain. I chuckled, watching his eyes light up with the simple joy of a child. "He's funny, isn't he? Like a little tornado." As we walked, my son's laughter mingled with the rustle of leaves, creating a melody that momentarily lifted the weight of my recent worries. My marriage had been rocky these past few months, and the park, with its memories of happier times, seemed both a balm and a sting. My wife, Laura, and I used to walk hand in hand along these very paths, dreaming of the future we'd build together. Lost in thought, I barely noticed when Charlie tugged at my sleeve. "Daddy, isn't that Mommy?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I followed his gaze and felt a sharp jolt in my chest. There was Laura, unmistakably her, but she was not alone. Beside her was our neighbor, Tom, his hand clasped in hers, their fingers intertwined intimately. They were laughing at something he said, heads thrown back in unison, carefree and close. Too close. An icy prickling sensation crept up my spine as I watched, hidden by a grove of maples. They stopped walking, and Tom gently brushed a strand of hair from Laura's face, his touch lingering, his eyes locked on hers. She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled up at him, a smile I recognized all too well, one that had once been reserved for me. "Daddy, why is Mommy with Mr. Tom? Aren't we going to say hi?" Charlie's innocent question pierced the surreal haze that clouded my thoughts. "No, buddy. Not today." My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. I steered him gently away, taking one last look over my shoulder at the pair who seemed to embody the ultimate betrayal. That night, after Charlie was asleep, the silence of the apartment gnawed at me. Each tick of the clock was a reminder of the scene I had witnessed. Rage simmered within me, mingling with a profound sense of loss. The images replayed in my mind, Laura and Tom, so at ease, so together. I couldn't just sit there, I needed answers. I grabbed my phone and dialed Laura. She answered on the third ring, her voice light and unsuspecting. "Hey, love, what's up? Where are you?" My tone was flat, controlled. "Just out with a friend. We'll talk when I get home, okay?" There was a casual dismissal in her tone that fueled my anger. "A friend, Laura? Or is it Tom?" The silence that followed was telling. "I saw you today, in the park. With him." The line crackled with her sharp intake of breath. I can explain," she stammered. "No need. Just come home. We need to talk. Now." When she arrived, the confrontation was swift and brutal. Accusations flew, harsh truths spilled, and the remnants of our marriage crumbled. Laura's confession shattered any hope of reconciliation. She had been seeing Tom for months, believing I was too preoccupied with work to notice. Fury overtook my better judgment. I vowed to make her regret her deception, to ensure she felt a fraction of the pain she had inflicted upon me. The methods I chose were harsh, driven by hurt and a desire for retribution. In the weeks that followed, I turned her friends against her, revealed her infidelity to her conservative family, and made sure she lost the support systems she had taken for granted. Eventually, I filed for divorce, gaining full custody of Charlie. Laura was left to rebuild her life from scratch, but as far as I was concerned, she was a chapter firmly closed. Now, walking through the park once more, the memories of that day still lingered, but the pain had dulled. Charlie raced ahead, his laughter a reminder that life goes on, even after the deepest betrayals. Yet, as I watched him play, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story was far from over. The paths we walk, like the seasons, are ever-changing, and revenge, would soon learn, carries a price of its own. The park was quieter than usual this afternoon, with the overcast sky and a brisk wind dissuading the usual crowd of joggers and families. Charlie, undeterred by the chill, was busy constructing a fortress for his army of action figures under a particularly large oak tree. "Daddy, can you help me find more sticks? The walls need to be stronger," he called out, his face a picture of intense concentration. "Sure, buddy. Let's make it the strongest fort ever," I replied, forcing a smile as I scanned the ground for suitable materials. My mind, however, was elsewhere, tangled in the aftermath of my actions against Laura. I couldn't shake off a growing unease about whether I had gone too far. As I gathered sticks, a familiar voice called out to me. "Hey, Jason. Long time no see." I turned to see Mike, an old college friend, approaching. His easy smile briefly lifted my spirits. "Mike. It's been ages, man. How are you?" I greeted him, grateful for the distraction. Doing well, doing well. Hey, I heard about your divorce. Tough break, man." His voice lowered in sympathy. I nodded, the familiar sting of the topic resurfacing. "Yeah, it's been a rough ride. But we're managing, aren't we, Charlie?" Charlie looked up, smiled, and gave a quick wave before returning to his fortress. Mike's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, I saw Laura the other day. She seemed different. Struggling, maybe?" His words caught me off guard, and a twinge of guilt pinched my conscience. "Yeah, well, she brought it upon herself," I muttered, more to convince myself than to inform Mike. Before he could reply, a shout from across the park drew our attention. A woman was running towards us, her face flushed with exertion and distress. As she got closer, I recognized her as Sarah, another neighbor from our block. "Jason. It's urgent. You need to come quickly, it's your house." Sarah panted, her hands on her knees as she tried to catch her breath. What? What happened?" My heart raced, and I grabbed Charlie's hand, pulling him close. I think it's best if you just come now," Sarah insisted, her eyes wide with concern. We hurried back, the fort forgotten, with Mike and Sarah accompanying us. As we approached, I could see smoke billowing from the direction of our apartment building. My pace quickened into a run, fear for our home and belongings turning my stomach into knots. Arriving at the scene, we were met by the sight of fire trucks and a crowd of onlookers. Firefighters were dousing the last of the flames, which had apparently engulfed a significant portion of one of the upper floors, my floor. "My apartment," I gasped, disbelief and despair washing over me as I clutched Charlie tighter. A firefighter approached us, his face grim. "Are you Mr. Matthews?" "We managed to contain the fire, but I'm afraid there's extensive damage to your unit." "What caused it? Do you know?" My voice shook as I spoke. "We're still investigating, but it looks like it might have been electrical, perhaps an appliance left on or faulty wiring," he explained, noting my panicked expression. As the reality of the situation sank in, Mike placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You and Charlie can stay with us tonight, man. We've got plenty of room." I nodded my thanks, feeling suddenly adrift. The destruction of my home felt like a cruel twist of fate, an echo of the turmoil in my personal life. As we turned to leave, a nagging thought tugged at my mind: was this really an accident? Or had my actions somehow invited this chaos into our lives? My gaze fell on Charlie, whose face mirrored my confusion and fear. Whatever the answer, I realized, the consequences of my vendetta were far from over. Mike's house offered a strange, albeit warm, sanctuary from the chaotic aftermath of the fire. As Charlie settled into the guest room, surrounded by unfamiliar toys and books, I sat in the living room, endlessly replaying the day's events in my mind. Mike handed me a strong cup of coffee, his brow furrowed with concern. "You sure you don't want to talk about it? Might help, he suggested, sinking into the couch opposite me. I took a deep breath, considering his offer. "I don't even know where to begin, Mike. My home is gone. And now, I have to figure out what to do next, not just for me, but for Charlie." Mike nodded, his gaze steady. "You'll figure it out. But, there's something else I think you should know." His hesitant tone made me tense. "What is it?" "It's about Laura," he began, pausing as if choosing his words carefully. "After seeing her the other day, she mentioned she was desperate to talk to you. Said it was urgent and important." "Laura?" The name left a bitter taste. "After everything, she wants to talk now." He nodded slowly. "Yeah. She seemed pretty shaken up, man. More than just the divorce, I think." I considered ignoring her, but curiosity and a lingering concern gnawed at me. "Do you know where she's staying?" "At her sister's place, over on 5th. But she's actually here, in town. Asked me to tell you she'd be at the park tomorrow morning, the one where you used to go together." The park again, the scene of so many memories, now tainted. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache brewing. "All right, I'll see what she wants." The next morning, under a gray sky threatening rain, I found Laura sitting on a familiar bench, her posture tense, her eyes scanning until they landed on me. She stood abruptly, a nervous smile flickering on her face. "Jason, thank you for coming," she said, her voice quivering slightly. I remained standing, arms crossed. "What's so important, Laura?" She took a deep breath, then blurted out, "I know about the fire." "I'm so sorry, Jason. But there's something else. It's about Tom." "Tom?" My interest piqued despite my reservations. "What about him?" She glanced around nervously before continuing. He's involved in some really bad stuff, Jason. I found out after everything happened with us. It's why I needed to talk to you." My skepticism must have shown because she quickly added, "I'm not making this up. It started with small things, but then I realized he's mixed up in illegal activities. I think he might be involved in your fire." The accusation hung heavily in the air, mixing with my shock and the cold morning breeze. "You think Tom burned down my house?" I asked, incredulous yet intrigued by her apparent fear. "I don't know for sure. But he knew about us, about everything, and he wasn't happy when I ended things. Said I owed him for keeping our secret for so long." The pieces began to click into place, albeit messily. My anger towards Laura softened slightly, replaced by a dawning realization of a larger threat. "Why come to me with this now?" I asked, my voice low. "Because I'm scared, Jason. For me, for you and Charlie. I think he's dangerous." Her eyes were earnest, pleading. I sighed, the weight of the situation settling on my shoulders. "All right, Laura. We need to figure this out. But we do it my way, understand? For Charlie's sake." She nodded vigorously, relief evident on her face. "Yes, of course. Anything." As we parted ways, with a plan to meet again and discuss our next steps, the first drops of rain began to fall, blurring the lines between past grievances and a shared cause. In that moment, despite everything, I felt a reluctant alliance forming between us, forged by necessity and a flicker of old trust that, perhaps, still lingered. The clouds overhead mirrored the turbulence that had settled over my life. As I approached the cafe where I was to meet Laura, the reality of our uneasy alliance weighed heavily on my mind. The thought that Tom could be behind the fire, and possibly more, kept replaying in my head, adding layers of dread to an already complex emotional tapestry. Inside, Laura was already seated, a stack of papers and her laptop open in front of her. Her face, etched with worry, looked up as I approached. "Jason, thank you for coming. I've gathered something that you need to see," she said, her voice a mixture of urgency and fear. I sat down, my expression guarded. "Let's see it then." She handed me a folder filled with photos and documents. They were receipts, emails, and messages that painted a dark picture of Tom's dealings, from shady business transactions to veiled threats against those who crossed him. "How did you get these?" I asked, my eyes scanning the damning evidence. I might have taken some from his office one night when he was out. After I started suspecting him, Laura confessed, her hands trembling. I looked up, a question burning through the shock. "Why didn't you go to the police with this?" Laura bit her lip, hesitating. "I was scared. He made it clear what he could do if I betrayed him. After seeing your apartment burn, I couldn't risk it. Not without knowing you'd believe me." The weight of her words hung between us. My mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline, the lies, and the betrayal. But something still didn't add up. "Laura, there's something else, isn't there?" I pressed, sensing the hesitation that lingered in her gaze. She sighed, a sound of defeat escaping her as she met my eyes. "Jason, there's more. Tom knew about us not because I told him, but because he had been watching me. And not just me." The implication hit me like a cold wave. "Watching us? You mean, he set us up?" "Yes. He orchestrated everything, from making sure you saw us that day in the park to pushing me towards him in the first place. He wanted to break you, to take everything from you. I was just a pawn, and by the time I realized it, it was too late." Anger and betrayal twisted inside me, a bitter cocktail that threatened to overwhelm my senses. "And you went along with it," I stated, the facts laying bare the depth of her betrayal. "No, Jason. I didn't know at first. By the time I figured it out, I thought keeping it quiet was the only way to protect us." The cafe around us faded into a blur as my focus narrowed on the woman across from me. The mother of my child, the woman I had loved, had been part of my undoing, whether wittingly or not. I stood up, the folder in my hand feeling like a ton of bricks. "I will take this to the police. But after this, Laura, I don't want to see you again. You're right about one thing, it's too late." Her face crumpled, tears welling up as she reached out, but I stepped back, the finality of my words hanging heavy in the air. "Take care of Charlie," she whispered, her voice broken. I nodded, the part of me that still cared for her aching. "I always will." Leaving the cafe, the rain had started to pour, washing the streets clean. I walked through it, letting it cleanse the fury and pain, even if just on the surface. The evidence would go to the police, and Tom's reign would end. But the scars of betrayal, the echoes of deceit, would linger longer, perhaps forever. As the cafe's lights faded behind me, so did the chapter of my life that held Laura. Ahead, the road was uncertain, but it was one I would walk alone, save for Charlie. The rain masked my tears, each drop a silent witness to the end of a love that had died, buried under the ashes of deceit and revenge.